fatted frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes. Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I am here with my fantastic co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, and together Rebecca and I are going to craft an incredible hour of radio called For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about them in the ways that it affects you, your wealth, your health, your happiness. Because since we're all wrapped up together in this big wiggly ball called Earth, you know, things that happen in the environment can't help but affect you. And so we should all be concerned about it. And for just an hour every week here on For a Green Future, sanity reigns, and we try to take a look at the stuff that actually matters, the stuff that really is affecting you and other life on the planet. And it's a great time, and we hope you join us. Call in at any time during this hour, 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007. You can also send a text, and we have a text receiving machine, i.e. my cell phone, right here ready, and we always appreciate it when you get texts at 419-973-5841. That's 419-973-5841 to send us a text, and we'll put you right on the air. And we have a nice show lined up for you today. We have a guest calling in. We're going to start talking with him at quarter after. It's Dr. George Bullerjahn from Bowling Green State University, and he's going to talk to us about some fascinating stuff they've been learning about what goes on under the ice at Lake Erie during the winter. It turns out it's a lot more than we used to think that happened during the winter in the lakes. Then we're going to hear from our fantastic advertisers and patrons, the people that we love so much here on For a Green Future. And Rebecca then will be talking to us. What do you have for us this week?
Swan Creek.
Swan Creek, right. The local Toledo Metropark, which has provided me with many an hour of joy, as it's got really wonderful trails and stuff. And Rebecca's got some news about Swan Creek. Then we go on to sort of a larger ecological news segment. Got some stories there, some interesting stories. And hopefully, as I said at this point, sometime in the show, we'll also hear from you, either by text at 419-973-5841 or calling in at 877-909-1007. And so we got just a few minutes here. I like to chat about various things that saw during the week, just whatever sort of strikes my ecological fancy here. And one thing that happened when we had our show last week, and by the way, happy spring, everyone.
Happy spring.
Yes, we are actually in spring today. So, but last week we had daylight savings time. And something that happens every year at daylight savings time I noticed was particularly evident this year. That is that the animals, when we jump ahead in the clock, when we start driving, an hour earlier than we were the day before for no apparent reason, animals which time their activities to match us, believe it or not, they actually know when the traffic's going to start picking up. And so how much time they've got to go forage over here and then get back to their den. A lot of animals get trapped by daylight savings time when we do that jump ahead. And so roadkill goes up like exponentially.
Oh, geez. Didn't know that.
Yeah.
Stands to reason, though.
Yeah. And this year was particularly bad. I mean, as I was driving down I-75, heading back after daylight savings time, it was like there was something had been run over every couple 100 feet or so. It's like raccoons or squirrels and skunks, and it's really sad. And once again, it doesn't. the problem of daylight savings time doesn't just affect animals, it also affects us because our sleep gets interrupted. Every year there's a peak in heart attacks and other horrible health effects. And we actually have a news story in our Ecological news story that kind of covers this, which holds out some hope for those of us that think daylight savings time is a bad idea.
On the plus side, your domestic dog or cat might let you, for a couple of days until they acclimate, let you sleep in for an hour. Or it's not really sleeping in for an hour. It's just they know the real time. Like they're not telling time by the clock. So it says 8, but it's really 7. So you feel like you're getting an extra hour anyway.
What you're telling me is Koga got fooled by daylight savings time.
He did like once and not anymore, yeah. Because he also has days where he's like, oh, it's 5:30 a.m. and I get fed at 7. Well, I better start early pestering her.
Yeah.
So that, to make sure she's awake by 7.
Gotta get
2.5 hours is about the right time
make
to
those
do that.
Preparations,
yeah.
Right? So one other thing I wanted to mention before we get to our guest is this is the time of year where we start to see those awful little signs popping up on people's lawns.
Oh, God.
The little plastic signs with the cute pictures of the dogs and the people on them. But the reason the picture's there is because they're saying, keep your dogs off our lawn. We just covered it in poison. And it's kind of amazing to me, and this kind of ties in. We had a caller a few weeks ago who mentioned this, that people that I know who are quote-unquote liberal or, ecologically or environmentally minded, people who recycle like crazy and things like that, will unthinkingly go ahead and have their lawn sprayed and put, these chemicals on their lawn. And we've tried to explain that things like the glyphosate that they use in these chemicals have a big impact on the environment. And there's supposed to be regulations about you can't spray the lawn like when it's raining or just before a rainstorm, but I've routinely seen that broken. I've routinely seen the spray trucks out during rain, and so this stuff gets into our waterways, and it's bad for pets, it's bad for the bees, it's bad for everybody. And think about why are you doing it? What are you trying to get from a sprayed lawn? You're trying to the ultimate achievement is this perfectly uniform green boring kind of grass. And I think a lawn that has a whole bunch of different plants in it, you get different little flowers, like you might get some snowdrops, you'll get clover, you get various little low-lying plants that have these cute little yellow flowers on them. Violets. We have tons of violets in our yard because we have not sprayed in over 12 years. And so every year I notice the biodiversity in my lawn keeps going up. I do have grass, it's not like there's no grass in my lawn, but I enjoy much more having this nice varied lawn with lots of different plants in it. And I'm just going to make my annual springtime plea: don't get your lawn sprayed.
Hey, we have all this birdsong in my neighborhood, mostly because, and also maybe not coincidentally, we do not have any of those little signs, which is nice, because that's the great thing about the gunfire in the distance. It keeps away the yuppies. No little signs.
Right, and if you're somebody who's using a substantial amount of your income on things like food, the idea of springing extra for a nice lawn, doesn't enter into it. So,
well, it's mostly out of town landlords on my block anyway. There's a couple people who actually own their house, but
right. So
then they don't spray, so that's good. That's one good thing about them.
So don't be one of those people with those little signs on your lawn this year. Just
you can have money and be prosperous and yet not spray your lawn, in which case you'd have the best words of both worlds. No gunfire, no poison. That's the dream.
Right. So take that money you budgeted this year for that kind of spraying and do something fun with it,
Yes.
Maybe go out to eat, or perhaps even make a donation to an environmental organization. There you go. And one other thing that I've been doing with my money, I had a visit from my son, and every time Tony comes into town, we do a project together. And this year we made a backup power system for the house. We went and bought the batteries necessary, and now I've got one more part I have to acquire, and that is these 500 amp fuses because when you're running things off of a battery, the amperage is just amazing. But once I get that 500 amp fuse in place, I'll be able to run my sump pump and my furnace for 2 days off of the batteries.
Cool.
So that's something everybody should consider. So maybe take the money you were going to put into your lawn and instead buy a backup power system for your house. That's a much better investment because, as I used to say when I sold these things, just all you need is one power outage with a failed sump pump, and now you've got thousands of dollars in damage. So there's my suggestion. Take your
little insurance
chemical money,
policy it
right,
is.
Use it for a backup power supply. Okay, well, we've reached quarter after, and so we'd like at this point to talk to our guests. So, Dr. Bullerjahn, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
I could hear you just fine. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
All right, if you could just share with our audience your name and title.
Okay, my name is George Bullerjahn. I'm professor of biology at Bowling Green State University and director of the NIH-NSF Great Lakes Center for Fresh Waters and Human Health at the university.
Yes, we really appreciate you coming on today. What prompted my call to ask you onto the show was I saw something on BGSU's website, actually, that you're doing some very interesting research on what goes on under Lake Erie when it's got that nice ice cover in the winter.
Oh, yeah, and this is actually something we've been working on and off for a number of years, and it's not just me, it's my graduate students and my colleague, Mike McKay, who is an adjunct at BGSU and a professor at the University of Windsor. And this year we've joined with a broader team led out of the University of Minnesota Duluth, where we look at the state of the lakes, all the lakes, during wintertime. But let me go back to when this started back in 2007, when Mike and I boarded a Canadian icebreaker, and we went through Lake Erie at peak ice season in February. What we saw, we weren't actually expecting to see that much. We had sort of felt that maybe the lake goes dormant in the wintertime, that the amount of biological activity would really be fairly low. I mean, of course, fish survive through the winter, but we really didn't think we'd see that much. And then all through the Central Basin, we saw these huge rafts of algae, of good algae, of diatom algae, that was a total surprise to us. At first, we thought maybe it was just sediment we were kind of churning up because diatoms look brown. But under the microscope, we saw massive amounts of biomass that is growing in and under the ice in the wintertime. And so we've gone out for a number of winters to look at the phytoplankton, the algae growing in the lake, in high ice years and low ice years. And we've seen some interesting differences between a high ice year and a low ice year. And there may be food web implications associated with that. The algae that grow in a low ice year are different than that which grow in a high ice year. And we don't know what the overall impact is, but we should expect more low ice years as a consequence of climate change.
Aha, very interesting. Yeah, I was taught, as a lad, that in the wintertime that the water temperature drops and the fish just kind of go into this torpor and just sort of hang out near the bottom, breathing very slowly, and sort of wait for the winter to pass. But your research is saying this is not the case. Well,
certainly the metabolic activity of the fish does decline. But we were thinking that due to ice cover and snow cover on the ice and the lower angle of the sun, that there'd be very little growth of phytoplankton in the wintertime, and that's clearly not true. We're seeing biological activity in terms at the base of the food web that actually rivals that of other seasons, and so one of the consequences of the diatom algae is that you're actually regenerating and you're regenerating nutrients that subsequently drive the food web. But secondly, a lot of this biomass actually in the Central Basin falls to the bottom, dies off, and actually can contribute to summertime hypoxia. And so in the Central Basin, so we're trying to establish best what that link is between wintertime productivity and summertime hypoxia.
Hypoxia being, let me just interrupt you just to, because whenever we have a big word, I like to jump.
Hypoxia, sorry.
Yeah, I like to jump in and get a definition.
In oxygen at depth.
So declining oxygen. So basically, the stuff falls to the bottom and bacteria starts eating it, and those bacteria use up the oxygen, as I understand it.
Right. And that is an issue. And for the longest time, I think folks thought that the summertime blooms of algae and especially the cyanobacteria are the major contributors to hypoxia. But now we think actually it's wintertime production that contributes to that. And so we're trying to understand what the links are between the hypoxia that we see and overall algal growth throughout the year.
So this kind of points up the fact that there's a whole bunch of different kind of microscopic critters that can do photosynthesis in the lake, and they sort of take turns, they take shifts, I guess you're saying, as the amount of light changes and during the different seasons.
That's right. Diatom algae typically grow at lower temperatures, and the diatoms that we're seeing in the winter are very well adapted to low light. So we've done experiments showing that looking at photosynthetic rates of samples taken, we measure photosynthetic rates of the algae over a broad range of light intensities, and really they do their best job at low light. If the light gets too high, they actually fail at photosynthesis. They are damaged by it. So they're low light adapted, and this is something that people have seen in other lakes. And there was a broader effort this past winter where people went out on all 5 Great Lakes to look at wintertime activity. And I can't wait to see what people have found in all the other lakes once the data set comes in.
Are diatoms, for a diatom eater, like a small fish, are they more nutritious or less nutritious than, let's say, an algae or a cyanobacteria?
They're more nutritious than the cyanobacteria that we see blooming in Lake Erie. So these are actually good for the food chain, for the food web. So we think a lot of the good algae are more associated with the wintertime and springtime rather than the summertime cyanobacteria.
So the good algae like the cold. Interesting.
Yeah.
And this go ahead.
And we've known for a long time that there are diatom blooms in the springtime when the water temperatures are cooler. We just did not know the extent to which they actually grew in the wintertime. So the lake does not go to sleep. That's so people just felt that, again, due to the factors I described, that the lake was basically inert or dormant in the wintertime. And a lot of that could have been just laziness. It's harder to get out there. And so you just assume, well, it's cold, I don't want to go out there. It's hard to go out there unless you have an icebreaker or a snow machine or something like that. So let's just not worry about it till spring, and then we'll start looking at the lake. And so we were lucky enough to have access to an icebreaker, and we found that the lake is very much alive.
Wow, that's really intense. I mean, we do know that every year the ice fishermen go out there and they catch a bunch of fish. So that does suggest, there's things going on under the ice. But I guess we hadn't really, despite, even after all this time, it's a surprise just how much is going on there.
And the ice fishermen certainly would likely have seen some of this in terms of the algae, but the main event is in the Central Basin and the open waters, the open part of the Central Basin. It's still ice covered, but still the offshore parts of the Central Basin is where most of the action is happening. It's much less a issue, or it doesn't happen to the same extent in the Western Basin where you see most of our ice fishing folks.
Well, plus, who's going to listen to a bunch of guys who lose at least one SUV every year,
Right. Yeah.
Clearly, they don't know what they're doing.
Well, I want to just say that's not the official position of For a Green Future.
Right? No, it's not.
Ice fishermen don't know what they're doing. No, we think they're great. Actually,
Mistakes are made. That's all I'm saying.
well, that's true of any group of humans. Yeah. So this kind of raises a question for me. I mean, diatoms have been around for a long time, right? They've, in terms of life on Earth, the diatoms were like some of the first species, correct?
Well, they're very ancient. I mean, they've been around longer than, yes. I'd say eukaryotic algae has been around for 1 billion years. Diatoms, I can't tell you exactly when diatoms first arose, but long before they predate terrestrial animals for sure.
Right, and we also know now I'm getting into scientific speculation, so you don't have to come along if you're not comfortable.
Okay.
But we do know that the Earth has had several periods of being so-called Snowball Earth, where most of the planet was covered with ice, including most of the oceans. And it looks so if some of these diatoms are really well adapted to low light levels, it sounds like maybe this is part of how life sort of carried on through the snowball periods. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I would say that we do know that many diatoms are low temperature and low light adapted. So it would certainly stand to reason that the primary production would be driven in part by diatom algae during those periods. Sure.
Interesting. All right. Well, Dr. Bullerjahn, so you guys were collecting information all this winter, and I guess now there's the task of analyzing all your data. How soon do you think you guys will be reaching some sort of like conclusions or publications?
It's been a really, really broad effort. There are labs from all over the Great Lakes Basin, each of which was assigned a different analytical method to look at both physical, chemical, and biological parameters of the samples that were obtained. And compiling all the data is probably going to take the rest of the year. We're looking at everything from water chemistry to the actual genetic profiles of all the samples taken, and there were over 30 samples taken. All the labs agreed that we would go out during peak ice season, which was the first and second week of February, and all those samples are then mailed to the appropriate or shipped to the appropriate labs that are going to do the measurements they were assigned to do. And then we're now starting the process, and it's going to be a long process to get all the data together. But I'm excited to see what we find. And the idea is that this is a baseline, and we can keep going out in subsequent years, comparing high ice and low ice years, and seeing what differences we see.
Very interesting. And so, when you say you're going to do genetic sampling, does that mean sort of a broad, just like see what all sorts of genes are in there and not like differentiate, or do you like try to pick out each individual strain of phytoplankton and genetically sequence that one?
We'll be doing just the initial screen. We'll just be looking at particular marker genes amplified from the entire community, and then sequencing all that DNA so that we know exactly what organisms are in the water. And we're talking phytoplankton and microbes. What microbes are in the water, and then roughly their abundance relative to one another.
Cool. And probably, I mean, you've been at this for a while. You probably couldn't have predicted that you'd be able to do that sort of thing just a few years back.
Well, yeah, if you put me in a time machine when I first started at Bowling Green, yeah, I'm thinking that, yeah, you're right. I mean, if you go back 30 or 40 years, looking at an entire community as rapidly as we can do it now is kind of I would not have been able to predict that 40 years ago. Sure.
A little mind-blowing there, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, well,
It's
thanks.
great to have these tools.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us, Dr. Bullerjahn, and we look forward to you guys reaching your conclusions, and maybe we can have you back on when you've done some of this analysis.
Yeah, great. It would be my pleasure.
All right, thank you very much.
Right.
Okay, that was Dr. George Bullerjahn, and his departure leaves the phone lines open. You can call us at 877-909-1007 if you found that interesting, or if you want to talk about any other ecological topic. We did get a text as our guest was on, and one of our listeners is asking people to count the number of insects on their car windshield, and that shows you insect decline. And part of the reason for insect decline is what our texter says is urban sterility, which means as more people put out pesticides and herbicides on their lawns, as people try to kill all the bugs, there's fewer bugs around. So you might think, oh, this is great, I don't have to clean my windshield as often. But there's a lot of implications. If we lose the insects, we will lose this race to see if we can continue existing on planet Earth. They're absolutely essential. So when you have a clean windshield in the springtime, when there's supposed to be the maximum number of bugs, that's actually a bad thing. So thanks to our texter, and again, thanks to Dr. Bullerjahn for joining us. And now we come to one of my favorite parts of the show, where we talk about our advertisers and patrons. For Green Future is brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, they provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats, and they lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy, from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every single day of the year. And there's a bunch of ways you can contact them to find out what's going on. One is you could just give them a call during regular business hours at 419-353-1897. That's 419-353-1897. They'd be happy to talk with you. You can also go to their website, wcparks.org. Lots of good information there. They have an app, a nifty app. You go to any app store. It's a free app. You look to search for WC Parks. And, of course, they're on all the social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's the Wood County Park District. And For a Green Future is also brought to you by our patrons. And our patrons are wonderful people who love nature and realize that we all have to work together to get to that green future that we're always talking about on this show. And part of doing that means making a little bit of an economic sacrifice, a tiny, painless little bit of an economic sacrifice. They went to patreon.com, Patreon, searched for a Green Future, up popped our nice little Patreon page. They chose a monthly membership level, and every month a little bit comes out of their checking account, comes over to us. And that's how we can afford to keep this show going. So thanks very much to our patrons. And won't you consider becoming one of them at patreon.com, searching for a Green Future. All right, Rebecca, we are ready.
Okay.
What do you have to talk about this week?
Well, I wanted to talk about it's a river. Swan Creek is a river. It's confusing, but according to geographers, it is in fact a river by their definition based on length, although it's called Swan Creek. So it's Swan Creek River. I don't know.
Okay.
But yeah, there's overwhelming when you look it up. There's a lot of information about the Metropark, not very much about the creek itself, but it appears to originate down near Lima, to have its source somewhere down there, and or almost to Lima, and runs. It seems like it runs through Fulton, Lucas, and Henry counties, basically.
I had no idea it started that far off.
Yeah, well, it's one of the Toledo Metroparks I have the least experience with, too, because I think I was there once and we were going to go for a walk, but it started raining, so that was the end of that. So, but it does have several miles of trails. It was created in 1963, has 451 acres, has a playground, a picnic area, extensive picnic area, window on wildlife, and a gazebo for weddings, couple playgrounds, so that's nice. It has, apparently you can see buckeye trees and tulip magnolias there, which are kind of unique. And also it has deer, turkey, fox, and raccoon. It has wooded areas and grassy plains, hills, and swampy areas. So it's kind of diverse if you want to, stroll around and see a number of different things. It's also described by some of the reviewers as being less busy than Wildwood, which is kind of like the mall, only with trees, but less buggy than Secor. So that's good. Also, one woman remarked there are no marijuana fumes there. So if that's a plus for you, hey, there it is. It's also attached to something called the Brookwood conference area that's open for private events, I guess. You have to reserve it and pay for it and things. I don't know about that. And there are currently plans to connect it with Maumee, the town of Maumee, and the UTMC area, which we're very close to. Actually, I could. It's like maybe a 5-minute walk to Swan Creek from right where we're sitting right now. And people say that the Glendale side is best for young children, whereas for older children and adults, pretty much the airport highway side. So, yeah, it also has the Jaeger Center, which is like their little conference center that you can rent and things. And, yeah, if you can't or don't want to make it out to the park, there is also a very nice viewing spot of Down Creek in the downtown area, little kind of area with benches where it looks all sort of romantic and, the foliage plays off nicely against the old brick buildings. It's right kind of where Summit Street meets Oliver, so adjacent to the Oliver House, Ohio Sub, and the Middle Grounds Metropark. So, you're at Middle Grounds, you can just wander over to this place and look at it for a minute. Also not that far from the bus and the train station, so probably walking distance if you have a little layover or something. But yeah, also at the Erie Street Market, which is on Erie Street in the south portion of downtown, there's a little platform and a landing. There used to be boat rides up and down Swan Creek. Maybe there are or will be again. I am not sure. So yeah, it's really a beautiful little creek. I've never seen swans on it. I have actually seen herons. Especially under the bridge near Owens Corning, right where it splits off from the Maumee River, or enters the Maumee River, strictly speaking. So, yeah, another thing, that little tidbit, there's an upcoming hearing, apparently, with the Lucas County Engineer's Office, and there's a petition to, as far as I can understand, it was very technical, but turn the ditch and drainage maintenance over to the Lucas County Engineer's Office, or like a coalition between them and Henry County's Engineer Office, for regular maintenance and desilting, which includes a bunch of ditches. It's really mostly about ditches, but and under the heading of ditch, it includes Swan Creek and 10 Mile Creek, another major local creek. So yeah, I looked up dredging, and according to the United Kingdom Environmental Agency on dredging, it has some negative effects. It'll stir up toxins, destroys spawning grounds, reduces oxygen levels because there's now all the silt that they stirred up in the water, and destabilizes the banks of rivers. The problem is people do it a lot because otherwise your river is no longer going to be channelized for the things that you have built your entire city and regional economy on it doing. Yeah,
channelized is the euphemism. And channelization, it increases the speed of the water, but it also drains the surrounding area, which means less water for plants and animals, and less fertility in general. Because, naturally speaking, all these rivers are supposed to be forming these deltas, which are these squishy, wet places. And so the more you channelize, which a lot of engineers think channelizing is just inherently wonderful, because now all their formulas that talk about water flow and everything work out perfectly, because in deltas things get very complicated, and you get channels are constantly reworking themselves and moving around, and engineers can't stand that. They hate that. So, but nature loves it. I mean,
or in the case of Northwest Ohio, for those who don't know, I may have mentioned this before, but we actually kind of are in a constant struggle to keep our entire area from reverting to something which it originally was called the Great Black Swamp, included those 3 counties and some other counties, basically. It was changed in the 1800s. Some German farmers came along and dug a bunch of ditches, and we are kind of always one farmer failing to pull a sapling out of the ditch at the edge of his property away from reverting to being a Great Black Swamp. So it's not so much a inspiring story of humans conquering nature as it is humans getting a tiger by the tail. That's what it is. Mm-hmm. And so, this one little thing about the maintenance of ditches and mucking around with local creeks relates to the whole question of, do we want it to get, in this case, it's mostly agricultural land. That's what we want it to be. Agriculture and subdivisions, basically. And, people have strong feelings about their property becoming swampland. And, if the second we stop artificially forcing it to be that, the tiger that we have by the tail is going to have big feelings also. So, it's kind of a hard sell. Yeah. Trying to not do that, even though it is not really great environmentally.
Yeah. I'm from what you're describing, I feel my first impression is of this proposal is leeriness.
Yeah.
Because there's already most creeks and most rivers around here get channelized, get forced into the lake just as quick as possible. And so if that's not happening in the parks, I mean, that could be the one place where we allow nature to actually do it naturally, which is provides the maximum benefit in terms of both cleaning the water, because a river with a delta, the water that eventually gets into the lake is actually cleaner than when you have this nice channelized thing that just dumps everything that's been in the fields and off the ground right into the lake. So all right. Well, thanks for the heads up on that. But,
you're welcome.
And I do want to say that the Toledo Metroparks, people make fun of Toledo. I mean, ever since John Denver, people have always sort of mocked this city out. But we do have a world-class Metropark system, I must say. It's something to be proud of.
Good library system, too.
Yeah.
Very good zoo and museum.
Yeah.
The bus system, really a pathetic joke. But, the rest of it's pretty good.
Yeah. Oh, and I also wanted to mention, I forgot to mention this at the beginning part, I've had to make a couple trips up to the Detroit airport, and on the way back, just over the Michigan line, last week I saw a sandhill crane, of all things, flying along as I was coming down south on I-75. This sandhill crane took off and was just flying along next to me. I was like, is that a sandhill crane? I had to go back and look the picture up to be sure, but yeah, it was cool.
Yeah, this is one of the only cities I've ever heard of where you have herons in the downtown, just like walking along the riverfront there on the little cement sidewalk, and sometimes you will see a heron sitting there.
Yeah, it's cool, and if we allow the streams to be streams and delta out the way they're supposed to, we would see even more of those critters.
Yep.
So, okay, well, thank you, Rebecca. And now it's time to head on to Ecological News. And as promised, our first story, you might have actually heard about this one on the mainstream media, ties back in with what I was talking about at the beginning of the show. So that's like cohesion in a radio program. So
there we go.
Ties the hour together.
Wow, cohesion.
The Senate has voted unanimously.
Maybe even actual coherence.
That could come too. The Senate has voted to end daylight savings time, or actually to make it permanent, to not keep switching back and forth, and to just have daylight savings time be the norm, which means more sunlight in the afternoon, which is actually when people do most active stuff is later on in the afternoon. And this, believe it or not, passed the Senate unanimously.
Oh my God.
on a voice vote. And it's something that 71% of Americans want. In survey after survey, about 3/4 of the people say, yeah, let's stop this crazy back and forth thing.
You can see the Onion headline, too. Congress does something Americans want.
I know.
Possible apocalypse at hand.
Wouldn't that
imminent.
Be bizarre?
Yes.
Yeah. No word, though, from the House, because the House has to pass it, too. And we're not sure if the House is even going to take it up. Nancy Pelosi might let this just sort of die. But as I've said, it would be a good thing for wildlife. It would be a healthier thing for humans. It would be, it's just a good idea to get rid of this weird back and forth thing. So we'll see what happens. But it was fun to see that the Senate actually passed something unanimously that people want. It feels weird. I have to say, it feels funny, but
Apparently that issue has escaped politicization somehow.
yeah, so far.
Yes.
It's yet to pass the House. We'll see what happens there. Okay, next story in The Guardian, March 17th by Anna Turns. And it turns out that what's happening all over the world is people liked to put landfills right next to the ocean.
No.
Because those were sort of boggy places that nobody wanted to build. So it'd be like, hey, let's put a dump there. And it turns out that now that the ocean levels are rising, what's happening in country after country, these landfills, these shoreline landfills, are actually getting broken open by the ocean, and all that stored nasty stuff is dumping into the ocean. The estimate is that there was 1,200 such places along England, because England's got a lot of coastline.
That's true.
Places where
and everything is near the coastline there. It's like Japan that way.
Yeah. And so it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem as the ocean gets bigger and bigger. Then in the U.S., I don't have figures for a number of landfills, but there's 800 of the U.S. Superfund sites are within a stone's throw of the ocean, and it being threatened with this whole ocean rising, toxins getting washed into the ocean. The article does talk about the possible solutions, and they range from inexpensive and ineffective, which would be like try to build barriers around the landfill so that they don't get washed into the ocean as everything around them does. That probably wouldn't work. To landfill mining, which is something we actually need to start doing. It's something we need to dig up those old landfills, which are still constantly leaking toxins into the environment, and take the resources out of them, because they're chock full of all sorts of valuable minerals and metals, and like lead and lithium and things like that. The problem is, of course, that along with all that valuable stuff are toxins, poisons, and things that have been dumped in there along with all the other stuff. But we have the technology. We have something called supercritical water thermal oxidation. We could just sort of take the stuff coming out of a landfill, put it through this process, and sort of precipitate out each element in turn. That's the cool thing about supercritical water thermal oxidation, is you dissolve everything into this super hot, super pressurized water, and then as you cool it, each element will precipitate out at a different temperature and pressure. So you could literally take all these chemicals and break them down into their component elements, and now you've got a resource instead of a poisonous situation. So that was an interesting article. Now on to our next story, and this is one it's kind of fun. The EIA, the U.S. Energy Information Agency, on March 18th released a projection in their annual energy outlook, and it turns out that they're saying that renewables are going to just completely wipe out all other sources of energy, and they're projecting 44% renewables by 2050. And the graphs are kind of interesting because it's showing that wind and solar already produce more energy than nuclear, for example. And the numbers right now are our electricity comes 21% from wind and sun. That's actual renewables. 37% gas, 19% nukes, and 23% coal. So wind and sun are, we've already passed nukes, and we're closing in fast on coal. And their projection is that by 2050, these numbers will have changed around. Will be 44% renewables, so that'll be the largest, followed by 34% gas, 12% nukes. So it's interesting that the Energy Information Agency is projecting nukes are going to be in decline, while the U.S. Nuclear Information Agency is projecting that they're going to grow like crazy. So the government needs to get its story straight here. And then they're still projecting 10% coal in the year 2050. So that's 44 renewables, 34 gas, 12% nukes, and 10% coal. And of course, that projection isn't near good enough, because we'd still be putting way too much CO2 into the air with those figures to survive. But it is encouraging that even the U.S. Energy Information Agency is sort of recognizing the fact that nukes are not going to get us there, that wind and sun are the big thing that we need to do the most of, and that they scale back both nukes and coal. So that's encouraging. Another story I wanted to talk about, which is sort of encouraging. It's also kind of disappointing. It's sort of wonderful and awful at the same time. Our good frenemies at Energy Harbor, the company that owns the Davis, Bessie, and Perry nuclear power plants, has announced that they are going to go 100% carbon-free energy, which unfortunately means pretty much 100% nukes.
No.
They don't have much in the way of wind or solar. But as part of that process, they have announced they're going to close 3 fossil fuel plants in the coming year, by June 2023. And one of them is the Samus diesel plant, which is in Stratton, Ohio. That's a 1.25 megawatt diesel oil generating facility. I mean, diesel power is sort of, that throws us back to the 1950s. That's when you had a lot of diesel plants around the world. So it's kind of interesting that Samus plant is still running. And they're also going to shut down the Samus coal plants, which is 1,700 megawatts. So they had just a little tiny diesel thing, but they had a great big coal plant. They're shutting both of those down. And there's also the Pleasance Power Units 1 and 2, which are coal power, which is another 1,400 megawatts. So Energy Harbor is planning to shut down a whole bunch of fossil fuel generation, which is wonderful, but they're doing it by saying we're going to be even more reliant on nuclear power, which is foolish because both our power plants here in Ohio are well past their shutdown date in terms of design. And yeah, the NRC has given them permission to keep going, but that doesn't stop the parts of the plant from breaking down. Things are they're having constant maintenance and breakdown issues. The way Kevin Camps describes it is nuclear power plants have a bathtub curve when it comes to reliability. That is, when you first start them up, you're breaking them in, you get a lot of things breaking down, you have to stop the plant, you got to fix things as they get, so you have a high point at one end of the graph of nuclear power plant shutdowns and maintenance problems. Then after they've been running for 10 years or so, they kind of reach a sort of a steady state. Most of the stuff that could break has broken, and it just sort of coasts along for 30 or 40 years, which is what they're designed to. But after 30 or 40 years, now new stuff starts breaking down because they're getting, they've been under intense heat, they've been under intense pressure, they're getting bombarded by radioactivity for 30, 40, 50 years. Welds start failing, little pinpoint holes start showing up in pipes and things, and the other end of that bathtub curve starts going up again. And that's where we are right now with Davis, Bessie, and Perry, with that bathtub curve is heading up again. And so it's really literally the worst time to put all your eggs into the nuclear basket. So it's great Energy Harbor's getting off carbon. That's wonderful. Kudos to them for that. But they're not doing the massive investments in wind and sun that we need to make up for that, for the loss of the fossil fuel plants, and instead they're relying even more heavily on their nuclear plants, which is just darn foolish. So, all right, well, we got about 6 minutes left of the show, and we've come to the end of the stuff that I've said I wanted to talk about in my carefully planned notes here. So the lines are open. We got time for a call at 877-909-1007 or a text at 419-973-5841. So this coming week, I'm going to depart on my long-planned cruise. I'm going to be cruising, not the Mediterranean, but the
Caribbean?
Caribbean, thank you. Yes, the Caribbean.
The other side of the Atlantic.
Right. And as I've said on this show before, taking a cruise like this is probably the least environmentally sustainable thing a human could do, because just the size of these ships and the amount of energy needed to run them, It's just incredible. But I'm assuaging my conscience a little bit because I'm not going to fly to Miami. I'm going to actually take the train to Miami.
Nice.
Which is going to take me 3 days. But I'm going to have a nice little stop at D.C. for a couple hours. I'm going to have a lunch with a friend there, and then it'll be time to get back on the train. And
Union Station, I've been there. It's lovely and impressive.
We have a caller. Caller, go ahead. Hey.
Hello. Hi. I just wanted to get in about the lawn business.
Oh, sure.
So, yeah, I'm a person who is completely baffled by the whole lawn thing. I don't get like they want to, just paint their yard or something. It's boring. You're right. You said it's boring. It's boring. Another thing that I wanted to kind of bring people's attention, if they could, that would be about, I noticed in my neighborhood anyway, that people are cutting down trees at an alarming rate. And I think they're doing it just because they're too lazy to pick up the leaves or whatever. I just making an assumption there. Maybe that's unkind, but at any rate, in the first place, they add so much shelter and they do so much to protect us, keep us cool, and then protect us against wind. And another thing is obviously that they're dens for. Just because a tree is dead in the center doesn't mean the tree is not useful anymore, because they're still growing on the outside and they're still provide shelter for small. All those reasons.
Yeah,
it just makes me so sad that literally any day of the week I drive down my old. I live in the west end of Toledo. It's an old neighborhood. They're cutting down a tree, and I'll stop and I'll be, why are you cutting down this tree? And they'll say, well, I don't know, the owner has to stay with me. So, that's their business, but it's very discouraging.
Yeah,
very discouraging.
Definitely, leave your trees up if it's at all possible.
They're doing this. Trimmed if you're worried about your house or whatever, but you can't. You just can't, by planting some decorative little dwarf tree or whatever, you're not replacing a maple tree. And plus, it's all the carbon storage from 60, 80, 100 years in a maple, and an oak tree could be hundreds of years.
Yeah,
so that's my beef.
I did notice they're doing that at the city park in Bowling Green. One of the best things about that park has been that they've got these huge old trees there, or at least they did. And it seems like they're targeting the biggest and the oldest ones. We were walking there this past week, and there was one that wasn't dead inside. The stump looked very healthy. So we stopped and counted the rings on the tree they just cut down for no apparent reason. And it was over 130 years old. So
they might be trying to recover some prairie or something. It's just speculating.
No, not
they should know what they're doing, but
yeah,
I don't know.
No,
I don't know. But anyway, that's my thing today.
All right, well, thank you. That's an excellent point. And yeah, there does seem to be a war on trees right now. So
it's ridiculous.
Jump in on the side of the trees, everybody.
4 generations it'll take to recover some of those trees. Think about that.
Okay.
Right.
Well, thanks for the call. We are now running out of time.
Okay.
And someone just texted me and said, while I'm in D.C., I should go eat lunch at the Native American History Museum.
Yeah, I saw that when I was there. I wanted to go see it.
Thanks for the advice. Unfortunately, I won't have time to leave Union Station, but there's tons of good restaurants there.
There is.
All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for listening. Thanks to the caller. Thanks to the texter. Thanks to our guest, Dr. George Bullerjahn. And we will be back next week. I'll be doing the show from Miami. So this is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
And we are signing off. I don't want them nukes. Run